the confiscation of land, the expropriation of land, the sort of spreading of another map onto this land, getting land back when it's been expropriated. So if we begin with your image of this layered view of land here.
Well, first of all, I am both a lawyer by profession and a writer, and Palestinian Walks combines these two strands. And I'm also a walker, so it combines the third strand, which is also the walking strand. And it's a book of 6 walks taken over a period of 25 years. And in the course of these 6 walks, I tell the story of the land, and also my personal story and my personal relationship with the land. It starts with the late 70s, when I had finished my legal education in London and came back to be a lawyer, and was appalled at what the Israeli occupation is doing, which of course started in a slow and not so obvious manner, so that people, when I was talking about the Jewish settlements being built and the danger they pose, they were not very impressed, and they said, "What's the big deal?" They didn't feel the urge to act then. Of course, now it's a completely different story, and so I started with others, a human rights organization called Al-Haq, which was the affiliate of the International Commission of Jurists, and tried to document all the changes and to take cases in wherever possible against the expropriations in various forms, because they were using various legal tricks to take the land. And tried that for a long time, and the settlement project, and I was aware of the settlement project, and you can say I was obsessed with the settlement project, because I could see exactly what was going to happen and how we are going to be turned into the suburbs of these settlements, just as my family comes from Jaffa, and just as Jaffa, which used to be a vibrant urban center of Palestine, quite vibrant, and the whole city has now become attached to Tel Aviv and has been insulted in every possible way. And of course, almost entirely, it's all the population of Arabs and from Gaza were forced out of about 80,000, 3,000 were left in 1948. And the other obvious thing is that the settlements, as you have seen for yourself, are built on high places, and so they're strategically positioned. So should a war happen, and they always count on a war, they would sort of descend down and force us, the Arab population, out of this land. But the land has been hostage to various views of it. It's been seen for what it is not. So it all began with that this is biblical land. And of course, the Bible is a religious text. And to interpret it as a historical text is sacrilegious as far as I'm concerned, actually. But it's also wrong and inappropriate, because it is not, the geography of the Bible is very weird and very untrue to the actual geography of the land. But it all started with the evangelicals and with Balfour. And Balfour, in his declaration in 1917, promised this Palestine, this land which was inhabited, to the Jews. And it started from there. It's a long history, we will not go into that. As far as I'm concerned, there is an Israel, there is a state of Israel, and there is an Israeli people. And the land of Palestine, historic Palestine, has to be shared at some point with the Israeli nation, which exists, just as the Palestinian nation exists. So in the Palestinian Walks, I was trying to show the land for what it is, and show the land for what has been made of it, which is a land that the Jews claim is Jewish land, and as far as the farmers and the way of life and so on, it was their land, and they never had to prove to anybody that it's their land. So in the course of the 25 years, I go through the various changes, and the worst of all is the drawing of a new map, which makes us, the original inhabitants of the land, feel like strangers in our own land. The features are so changed, the roads are changed constantly, so that we get lost in our own land. And that, I can tell you, is a very weird and difficult feeling to experience.
You were talking about some of these legal tricks, you call them, of expropriating land. One of the tricks that struck me in the book was that you thought at one point land was being taken to make a sanctuary, and you thought this is a good thing at first, till you realized that this was yet another form of appropriating land. What would you give us an idea of some of these legal maneuvers?
Well, the ideological basis of the whole thing is that this is land that belongs to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people have been away for 3,000 years. Now they are back. Those who happen to be on the land can stay where they are, but they cannot expand, and everything, all the rest is not theirs. So all the rest becomes called public land through a legal maneuver, which is not in accordance with the local law or with international law. And public land comes to belong to the only recognized public, which is the Jewish public. Now, according to international law, all of this is nonsense, because it's very clear under international law that an occupier may not establish Jewish settlements, may not bring its own people into the occupied territory, and anything of that nature is called a war crime, in fact, akin to what happened to Europe and many communities in Europe in the Second World War and before the Second World War. So they have, the Israeli military took this map of the West Bank and decided arbitrarily that this is to be declared public land, and if anybody wants to oppose this declaration, they can do so in Israeli military tribunals. And in order to do so, the burden of proof lies on them, and the burden of proof is made so high that it's impossible to reach it, and it's so expensive to go through it that it's impossible. At the same time, some land is declared public land, other land is declared nature reserve, and this is where your question comes in. And I thought it's very good to have nature reserves, and that would preserve the area for no building. But it turns out that this is just a first step towards taking the land and the settlements now built in nature reserves, which only the Palestinians were prevented from. And also some of these nature reserves are out of reach of Palestinians. They've become, the springs have been renamed, the hills have been renamed, signs have been put saying only Israelis, and if you try to go there, then you can have an unpleasant experience and be forced out. So a new map, literally a new map, has been created in the region. And in Palestinian Walks, through walking in the land and showing what changes have happened in the course over the 25 years that the book covers, I try to explain in a way that an ordinary person, not a legal person, can understand, while at the same time bringing in all the facts and all the changes and all the different layers, legal and otherwise, into it. But also, in the book I intended to show that the land is very beautiful, that the land is appreciated, that the land is being destroyed by those who claim to love it more. Destroyed because when you try within a few decades, as has happened here, to build very quickly entire towns and cities in hills that are not equipped to take so much you're paving and turning into concrete what was beautiful and untarnished for millennia. And that is what is happening in front of our eyes. So it's a cry of pain on my part to see all these areas that I've become so fond of because I've lived here all my life and because I've walked on them and appreciated them, to see them being transformed in this.
So the
terrible way.
destruction of the land and the destruction of the connection between the people and the land because of what it does to their way of life, their occupation, and so on. But if we move a little from Palestinian walks, which I think is the best way to start looking at the land, the beauty of it and what it meant to people and what it means to people still, and to go more specifically into your experiences as a lawyer, I think it would be of great interest for us to know what were some of the, if you could give us one or two specific examples of cases which show us in actual fact what the maneuver was and what were the legal efforts that you and your colleagues made and what was the outcome, which I imagine was not entirely positive.
The point to start with, we in the beginning had long arguments. Should we use what is available of legal challenge, or will we be legitimizing the occupation by doing so? And then we were faced with the challenge that, the Israelis are providing a way to challenge these orders. Why don't you try? So we thought we will try. And then we had the delusion that we would exhaust the system by having so many cases that they would not have the capacity to go through all of them. Of course, we were wrong, because they have the means at their disposal, without a parliament, without a legal recourse, to change the law and keep closing every loophole we could possibly find. And this is exactly what they did. So in one case, for example, which I discuss in the book, the Albina case, which I think is an extreme example, there is a small settlement, Beit Horon, near Beit Or Fo'a. And the owner of the land is a travel agent, a respectable travel agent in Jerusalem, was passing by his land one day and saw that there is building there. So he checked with me, and we went to see, and then I went to the authorities, the military authorities, and they said, oh, this is an absentee land. In other words, land owned by a Palestinian who isn't here. Well, the fact that a Palestinian isn't here and cannot come back because the Israeli authorities prevent him from coming back should not legitimize taking his land and giving it to Israeli Jews. But this is how they think, and they have a category, which is a huge category of land, absentee property. And the absentee property is considered as property that they can use freely. And so I said, but Albina, in this case, which is his name, is absolutely here. And he's very much here. He's a travel agent in Jerusalem with a very big sign, and he happens to be a very big man, rather enormous. So you can't say that Francois Albina is not here. So they said, never mind. But then it must be that it is public land. I said, no, this is land that is owned by him, and he happens to have all the documents. He's very careful, and he kept all the documents, and they were very precise. So we went through a huge, long affair in the tribunal, and the head of the tribunal happened to have been the classmate of my uncle, who is also my law partner at school during the mandate time. And of course, he's also a lawyer. So lawyers in the Israeli system do the reserve duty as judges on these tribunals. And rather than try and defeat the system, they just go along because it's a very convenient way of doing what you are required to do, which is a reserve duty. So there he was, being very loyal to his cause, illegal cause, and there I was giving all the documents and having Albina come and so on. And they tried every possible way they used all the usual tricks, and at the end they failed. because we proved that this is private land. And so they were taking private land. So I thought we've won this case. No, we didn't win this case, because the judgment said, whereas we are convinced that this is private land, and it has been proven to our satisfaction that this is private land, yet when the custodian of absentee properties made the agreement with the Zionist Federation to give the land to the settlement, he had believed in good faith that it was absentee property, and therefore the agreement stands. Now, where is the good faith when they have all the records? They have entirely access to the records. In fact, they have the access to the records. We don't have the access to the records, because this is one of the changes that they made after the occupation. So there's absolutely no good faith. And I had anticipated that they would say something like this, and said there cannot be good faith because they have access to the records. No way. He said, good faith, the agreement stands, and we effectively lost the case. So after that, I thought there's no way you can win in this system.
And what are the sort of legal interventions you make now with
Well,
this history?
then the next thing I was involved with, of course, I mean, we're talking about years that I was trying with all kinds of cases and all kinds of legal arguments. And in some cases, we were able to reduce the size from several 100,000 dunums sometimes into 100 dunums. So at least we could save some of the land. But the next thing I got involved with was the the case against the the case against the wall, which they are trying to build, which is built almost, not entirely, but a large part of it is built inside the West Bank with the hope of and aim of taking West Bank land into Israel, annexing it effectively. And so we went to the International Court at The Hague, and I was involved with several other lawyers, of course, in that case. And we won the case, and the judgment was an excellent judgment, which said settlements are illegal under international law. The building of the wall in the way it is being built is illegal. If Israel wants to build the wall, it must build it along the border and not inside the occupied territory. So this was a great victory. Unfortunately, nothing came of it. Nothing came of it. Israel lives above the law, and it's tolerated as living above the law. And it lives above the law because it says we have our own law, which is a higher law, which is exactly like Iran is saying. There's no difference. There's no difference.
Well, now that we've covered the gap between the law and its victories, which are actually in real life minor victories because they don't bring about the change that they should, I thought, moving on, I got the impression from your book, a very strong impression, that your personal take, your political take on what can be done in the situation underwent a change after the Oslo Accords. And I wonder if you could tell us about that, because your approach, the problems remain, the expropriation of land, whether through these maneuvers, through the new wall now. So to talk about what can be done.
Yeah. Before the Oslo Accords came into being, there were negotiations that first started in Madrid and then moved to Washington, D.C. And it was a delegation from the occupied territories, and I was a legal advisor for the delegation in Washington, D.C. And I did my best for the first year to bring to their attention what I knew from the legal changes that have happened and from my understanding of the Israeli strategies for taking over. And I did absolutely my best, and then realized that something fishy is going on, and I left after a year. And then 2 years later, the Oslo Accords were signed. And when I saw and read the Oslo Accords, I was completely flabbergasted. I thought the Palestinians sold out, essentially, surrendered, because the Israelis got everything they wanted. Everything that they had made through a unilateral change in the law has now become bilateral with the approval of our representative, the PLO. And the most important thing, which in Washington we had on and said impossible to reach any agreement without a cessation of building further settlements, they had dropped. So the Israelis succeeded in dividing the land into three categories, category A, B, and C, with C over 60% and C being viewed and presented to the Israeli public as land which the Palestinians also have agreed, which wasn't true, of course, but this is how they presented it. The Palestinians also have agreed would eventually, in the final agreement, go to Israel. And therefore, if you settle in area C, then you're not settling in occupied territory, and you will not be removed, and so it is safe. And so those who were reluctant of the Israelis to settle in the occupied territories stopped being reluctant, came to settle, and the settlements flourished as never before. Now, I was completely depressed and thought the work that I and others have been doing for years to expose the Israeli, now in a way the legal case has been destroyed. And so it was then that I turned to writing. I mean, I had written books on the law and literary books before, but I was doing it along with my human rights work and my legal practice, which was like being in three professions at the same time. So after the Oslo, I decided I will put more energy into the writing, and this, of course, was a correct decision to do, because you can always write. You can write at night. You can write in between sessions, court sessions. You can write in your head as you walk along, as you know. But writing also does require time, good writing. And I never gave myself that time. And after the Oslo, I started giving myself the time. And this was when I wrote Strangers in the House and several other books, including Palestinian Walks. And I must say that I have been gratified by the fact that so many readers of these books, and particularly in the case of the Understanding About the Land, Palestinian Walks, have said, now we understand what has happened. Now we understand what the Israelis are trying to do. And all the time before, when I was writing all these legal treaties and documenting and so on, nobody said anything of the sort. So in a way, when you write effectively in a literary fashion, in a fashion that people can identify with, and there are an amazing number of people who are walkers, or who like to think of themselves as walkers and enjoy walking, and so enjoyed the book and went along with it, and identified, and it I think reached and did a greater service to the cause.
Sometimes writers are more useful than lawyers.
Sometimes. Yeah.
No, but I have one last question about the legal angle, which is that with the recent UN not quite recognition. But
no, it is a recognition of a state.
With this new status, and of course the first and obvious question is legal, which is that you can go to the International Court to take up what you have called war crimes. So what do you think are the chances of that happening, and how will that play out, do you think?
Like everybody else, I started with the law with the naivety of thinking that if you have the law on your side, then you have everything you need. But of course, whether it is municipal or international law, you can have the law on your side. But if you're not powerful, you cannot use it. And in the case of Israel, there hasn't been a single instance when Israel has been held accountable for violations, small or large, of the law. And there are so many violations that Israel has committed throughout of the law, but there hasn't been a single instance. And that is because it is such a powerful state. Now, to use the law which we have on our side would require perhaps power that we don't yet have. But at the same time, you at least now have something to wave against them, a threat that they are worried about. They are seriously worried about it. But belief and confidence in states is very small, and it's simply because when it comes to affecting politicians in Western countries, I can't speak about India because I don't know, but I know more about Western countries, they will not lend a hand to Palestine, and they will lend every hand to Israel because there are more strong lobbies for Israel than there are for Palestine. And so if anybody sticks their neck out for Palestine, they get their head chopped, literally. So politicians are, by nature, survivors. And so it's not going to work that we can expect that politicians. But there is a change in the people. And it's rather prevalent, whether it is in Europe, very much so, whether to some extent in America. I don't know, I can't speak about India, I haven't visited or read enough, but the hope is that the people's power would make a difference. And that's how it happened in South Africa. Because as long as the South African regime, with all its crimes, was economically beneficial and otherwise beneficial, strategically and so on, against communism and all of that, for the West, it didn't matter that they were committing all these crimes against humanity, which were crimes against humanity without any question. And South Africa used to say that it doesn't matter if the whole world is against us, as long as the United States is with us, that is what matters. And then overnight, the United States, because it deemed it's not in its interest, changed sides, and everything fell apart. And with Israel, there are many supporters of Israel and Zionists who are in the United States and in Europe, who are very worried now about something that they had never been worried about, which is the very existence of the state of Israel if it continues on this course. And so they are becoming allies to us. And there is some hope in that. But there's also hope in the common humanity, because it's very strange and very heartening to realize that people, however different they are, have a common humanity. They do not like oppression of other people. And when they know about it, they take it up and fight and struggle, even though they don't know anybody in that place. They just can't stand it. And so the common humanity is a hope, and it will come to something. Now it looks very dismal here. It looks as if nothing is going to work. It looks as if Israel is winning at every point. But I'm not convinced that that's the case, and I'm literally convinced that the whole of the fragmentation of the region is too artificial to last. And we will someday return to being one unified region, Greater Syria, with an Israeli presence, because it's also nice to have difference. Difference is enriching. But I don't know when it will happen, but I have no doubt that it will someday happen.